So this one is the 6th and final week of the Creative Job Search series of webinars. As I said, we've got all of the past sessions available online. Check those out. And as I said, what we're going to do is I'm going to just throw everything at you all in one glorious, just throw it into the pot, all of the vegetables, all of the everything. Type in those questions, and then we're going to spend the last chunk of today talking about them. So let's get on to what we're going to do. This is my job today. These are my goals. What I want every single person to be able to do at the end of this is be able to create a basic T-table that matches your skills with the needed skills listed on the job description. Now, if you've seen this before, I know there's a couple of people rolling their eyes. Seriously, guys, there's a reason why we harp on this, because this is seriously important to know how to do. The other thing, being able to name 3 advantages of networking. And by the way, before the anxiety goes up, I would say that now, certainly post-pandemic or in the middle of pandemic, networking is actually easier than it used to be. Number 3, understand when and why it's important to leave off experience and qualifications that go beyond the company's needs. And that falls hand in hand with the next bullet point, which is be able to avoid the common pitfalls of being seen as overqualified. That's going to come together, and you're going to know what I mean when we get to that point. And then finally, successfully keep the momentum of the job search going for as long as it takes. All right, so I want to start with some good news. There's enough bad news already. We don't need any more bad news. But before we get to the good news, what I want to do is I want to hear from you guys. And I want to hear from you guys in just one word. Now, some of you have already greeted me and the rest of the classmates in the chat box. If you haven't used the chat box yet, here is your chance. What I would like everybody to do in the chat box now is I would like you to write down one word that describes the job searching experience over the age of 40, 50, whatever. So if somebody were to say, describe job searching at this point in your life right now, what would that one word be? And of course, I don't need to remind you, don't use any words you wouldn't use in a professional interview. Okay, challenging, stressful, frustrating, depressing. Ooh, frustrating seems to be a big one. Disappointing, humiliating, oh, unfamiliar, exciting, yay! I'm glad we're getting some stuff on the positive side too. Fearful, fruitless, scary, wild. I love that. Challenging, depressing, uncertain, non-responsive. Man, these are really good. All of these are really, really good. Okay, so here's the reality, guys. I don't kid myself. We've got 60 minutes for you today. I'm certainly not going to, give you a magic bullet or something, and so that you all leave today going, "Oh my God, it's fantastic! I know exactly what to do." But what I hope to do is to give you practical, proven advice, so that some of these more negative words are going to be softened a little by the time that we get done. Okay? Thank you very much for participating in that. I really, really appreciate it. Now, on to the good news. As I said, let's talk about good news. A recent article in the Harvard Business Review has given us some hopeful news finally, that employers are looking for experienced workers to help them through the current crisis. Now, they've got things called return to work programs, and they can be things like returnships. Believe it or not, that's a thing. It's like they're run kind of like internships, but they're for people who've already worked several years, and it's a returnship to get you up and going. And then, of course, they've obviously got direct hire programs as well. But here's the thing. Experienced workers can have the edge over their younger counterparts by bringing to the table things like institutional knowledge, education, work experience, mature perspective, stable life stage, dedication, loyalty, and energy, and enthusiasm for returning to work. Remember, by the way, what Art said, we are going to give you notes from this, so you don't feel obligated to write all this stuff down. You'll get it. Okay, so here's the deal. Many older workers forget to promote their soft skills, things like adaptability, emotional intelligence, mentoring, cool-headedness. They're people skills, right? And I think the reason they forget to talk about them and promote them is because these skills come so naturally. They don't think of them as formal skills. Now, I'm 57. I was taught a whole bunch of things that I swear younger people just simply weren't taught. And it's not the younger people's fault. They're smart people. It's just that it was a different culture. And here's the thing. There's a real soft skill gap in the workplace right now, and they are looking for people who are going to stick around. And are there certificates for soft skills? There should be. Are they going to stick around? Are they going to be able to adapt? Are they going to be able to stop on a dime and go somewhere else instead of, just completely melting down and having to be talked from the proverbial ledge? We're going to be talking more about this. And by the way, I actually can say that I have been hired on the strength of my soft skills when I was working with a group of people who were less than half my age. So it works. Okay, what I want to do here is I want to talk primarily today about what has changed. It always bugs me when I go to over 50 job search classes and it's basically a reworked general job search class. What I want to do is I really want to talk about what has changed, because I know every single one of you have gone on an interview, okay? But things may have changed. So if you have been out of the workforce for a significant amount of time, or you've been working in sustained employment, and I know that's a situation too, where people are like, this is the first time I've had to look for a job in 30 years. You may find that resume writing, interviewing, and the job search has itself changed. Here's an important thing, not happy to think about, but it's true. What used to work for you may or may not now. Those of you who worked in fields where employment changes often may be aware of some of these changes, but honestly, there's going to be stuff for you here too. So in this section, we're going to be talking about matching the skills to the skills listed on the job, really focusing. Focus on what they need and don't put other stuff in there because it can be misinterpreted. We're going to be talking about the vital importance of networking, and I'd argue that that's easier to do today because of technology. Teleconferencing is the way a lot of interviews are happening. I realize it's going to be kind of a mix now, a back to in-person, but teleconferencing as well. And finally, the biggest thing, you yourself. Oftentimes, we don't give a lot of thought to how we ourselves have changed since the last time we interviewed for a job and how those changes can affect how we self-market. Okay? All right. Now, as I said, keep those questions coming in the chat box. I'm going to move on to the T-table and matching your skills to the skills listed. Now, historically, as you know, resumes were written chronologically, and even some interviews were conducted that way. So you listed the duties of your most recent job at the top, and you worked your way down from there. Now, in this model, the responsibility was on the hiring manager to make a connection between what you did before and what he or she wanted you to do now. All accomplishments were considered important, even if they weren't directly relevant to the job being pursued. Now, here's a little sidebar before I get too far off. Chronological resumes are still being used in certain instances today. They've not gone away. Reach out to your local career force and ask them to help you decide which type of resume is best to tell your story, okay? So you've just got more options now. But here's the thing. These days, employers want to see directly and quickly the actual experience and accomplishments that you have that directly relate to the skills listed on the job description and that make you the right one for the company's needs. So how do you do this? Well, one way you can do it is by using what is called a T-chart or a T-table. Now, keep in mind, what I'm going to show you right here is something that you make for yourself. This is not something that you would ever show an employer. You don't, I mean, some people have used some of this information on a cover letter or resume, but I would do so carefully. Right now, what I'm talking about is an exercise that you do to help get yourself ready to go, okay? So the first thing you do is you draw a big old T on a piece of paper. Next, list keywords from the job description in the left-hand column. And finally, write out your accomplishments or experiences that match the keyword or the phrase. The process should give you a clear picture to see how you fit this position and prepare the talking points for the interview. So basically it's, oh, you want this? Great, I've got it. Here's how. You want this? Great, this is how I've already done this. You want this? Absolutely, I have experience. This is what it is. So it's really just boom, 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 boom. Do you have to meet every single one of them? No. But I think honestly, if you do this, you're going to get a clear picture of, do I want to go ahead? And then you're going to have to be prepared to talk about the stuff you have less experience in. But this should be able to give you a really good idea to start out. Okay? Now, I feel like I'm going at 100 million miles an hour, so just keep those questions coming, because I'm actually going to move on to the next thing that is changed, which is networking. Now, here's the thing. The statistics are consistent. 75 to 80% of jobs come from knowing somebody who knows somebody. A sobering reality is that there are many jobs available that simply will not appear on job boards. These jobs are advertised through word of mouth, associations, company-related websites. And networking and informational interviews can really help the experienced worker, especially one who has not been on the job hunting trail for a long time. For example, let's say that you now want to make a career change and get into something that you've never done before, or, like I did, you want to get back into something that you haven't done for years and years. The big question for you is, do you have skills that will make you competitive? The best people to give you that answer are the ones that are actually doing the work you seek. Find those folks. Ask them to review your resume and give you candid feedback on whether they think that you're out of the box ready or whether you may need to update your credentials. Networking and informational interviews can also, networking and informational interviews can also assess whether or not you even want that career change. You know, after talking to some people in the field, you may discover that new job is not exactly what you want. That is fine. Back out of that road, head down another one, okay? Talking to people who are doing the work you want can also give you insider tips about where to find the jobs. What specifically will employers want here? My mentor did this for me years ago. She says, Robin, you keep calling yourself a teacher on the resume. You say you want to become a trainer. Use trainer. You know, they're really honestly gonna get that granular, and it's fantastic. They can tell you what the important software is, if there are certifications that will put you over the top, what kind of language to use. So remember, I was talking about soft skills a while back. They may be able to give you insider tips. They say, hey, we got a very young staff. They're not really great at adaptability. You're going to want to have some good example stories about adaptability and that kind of thing. All right. Another advantage to networking is that you can find out about jobs before they are posted. Insiders can sometimes say things like, well, there's not really anything in the department right now, but I can tell you they're budgeting for a position that sounds exactly like what you're talking about, and that's going to be available in about 3 months. And finally, more experienced workers are choosing to focus on specific companies or organizations rather than wait for the jobs to be posted. So that's kind of a trend now that people are targeting certain organizations, certain companies, because they really believe in the mission, they really believe in the service or the product or whatever, and they start getting to know people at that company to see where they can slot their skills in. So basically what I'm saying is a quick phone call, a quick email. The idea is that you're not, don't let them think that you're fishing for a job, because that can be off-putting. That can kind of alienate them. But the idea of, I'd like to find out more about what you guys do. I'd like to find out more about what possible opportunities would be for me down the line, and just basically see what's happening, because they might be able to give you a really good positive picture of what's happening with their company. They also might have some ideas about another company you hadn't even thought of before. Okay, so that's the whole thing about networking. And I'll tell you right now, networking is daunting even for me, and I've spent my entire life talking, but I have found that it has been absolutely invaluable for me in my own job search. Okay, so teleconferencing. So this was pretty much how everything was being done. This has certainly changed, maybe since a lot of you have have interviewed, and I haven't really gotten a lot of feedback yet in terms of numbers about whether it's going back to face to face. I'm kind of getting the impression not. I'm kind of getting the impression that a lot of it is going to be teleconferencing. So this is going to be something that is going to be a little different. And some of you maybe have teleconferenced a lot in the past year. You've talked with friends, you've talked with family, maybe you Zoomed on your last job or whatever. So what might be new to you is doing the actual interview over the internet. Okay. Well, good thing for those of you who haven't done a lot of teleconferencing at all is that you're doing it now. Let me just talk to you about brief bits of advice. Okay, I'm going to paint broad strokes, and we're certainly here to help you on a more specific background. But let me just talk to you about some brief things to be thinking about now as you are getting set up. Set up your background. Okay, so some of you may played around with, or you've at least seen the fake backgrounds that you can create with Teams or WebEx or some of these others. Here's an interesting little bit of statistics. Employers don't like them. And I think there's a reason. I think, first of all, they are pretty fakey. Secondly, the technology is not so great. If you move really quickly, half your head disappears, and it just doesn't look great. The thing to remember about backgrounds, if you were teleconference an interview, make sure that your background is not going to compete with you for their attention. So, a strange painting behind you where they're constantly looking around you and trying to figure out what is that, or obviously, people walking around. There's all these funny videos on YouTube of people who, bombed a teleconference without realizing it and that kind of thing. So make sure that the background is simple. I gather that bookshelves and a simple artwork is fine, and that's wonderful. Good lighting is also extremely important, okay? Make sure that they can see you. You don't want to sit right in front of a bright window because then you're going to be in silhouette. You don't necessarily want to be right beside a really, really, really bright window because then you're going to be bleached out. You can buy these selfie lights. They're not terribly expensive, and they will add a little bit of that warmth, but don't feel like you have to go out and get yourself out with all of this expensive stuff because you really don't have to. Just make sure that they can see your expressions, they can see your eye contact, which we'll talk about in a minute, and that the lighting complements you. Dress as you would for a face-to-face all the way down to the shoes. And I include the shoes simply because psychologically, I think it puts you in more of I am a star and I'm bringing my best game to this situation, as opposed to if you're sitting in shorts and barefoot. Okay? You see what I mean? So I talked a little bit about eye contact. Eye contact is extremely important. And this can be forgotten. We are so used to staring at a screen that frequently when we're doing teleconferencing, we're actually looking down a couple of inches too low to be actually making eye contact. The nice thing about teleconferencing is that you can actually put Post-it notes up, and as long as you're not covering up the actual camera, you can remind yourself of all kinds of things like smiling and making eye contact. It is so important that you look directly into the camera. Imagine that is the face of the person who is interviewing you, and they're going to want to see your expressions. All right, make sure your audio is good. And as we shared this morning, boy, that can go south really quickly, and it isn't anybody's fault. It's just connections and things like that. We wish that there was a one-size-fits-all suggestion about good audio. There isn't. When Career Force were figuring out teleconferencing and doing everything last year at this time, we discovered that what works for one person didn't necessarily work for somebody else. Sometimes headsets were the best way, sometimes microphones, sometimes just the laptop built-in microphone was the best. Find out. Experiment a little bit and find out how you sound the best. And if you don't remember any of this stuff, remember this one. Let this be the thing that you take away. Have a backup phone number handy at all times. So if, yes, suddenly the Wi-Fi does go out, you can call that individual immediately and find out what is the next step from there. Okay. Now, as I said, I'm painting really broad strokes there. We can get into it in a few minutes. But the final thing that may have changed since you've interviewed the last time is you. So I encourage you to take some time to think about the following. How do you feel about looking for employment now? And do those feelings show? Now, of course, if you really are enthusiastic about the idea, and I know some of you are, that's fantastic to let that show. But if your feelings are negative for whatever reason, if you still have some emotional leftovers from your last employment or resentment about having to look now at this stage in your life, this could be a problem. And what I would recommend is that you reach out to somebody in your life that you trust to be straightforward with you. Ask them if they're picking up on any bitterness or resentment or just struggle to move on when you're talking about your last position. If they are, feel free to reach out to us. We can help you find ways of talking about your current job search in the most positive and effective way. And I know a big question that's tough for everybody is why did you leave your last position? And so we can work with you, quite intensely about that, about choosing positive or neutral language. Okay, next, evaluate your skills now. You've accumulated many, many skills both on the job and just by living your life. So chances are you've got a whole truckload of stuff that you didn't have the last time you went on a job interview. And connected with that, what makes you a better candidate today than you were the last time? What have you learned or gotten better at that maybe a younger employee has yet to learn? And as I said, I can truthfully say that I got a job not terribly long ago because I have learned just through living to be adaptable. And the younger people that I was working with, by the way, they were smart. They were good, smart employees. There was nothing wrong with them. It's just that they hadn't lived long enough. They hadn't gotten over that hump yet. So when they were asked to stop on a dime and go a totally different direction, they kind of had trouble with that. And then finally, here's an important one, guys. What are your goals? Now, this is almost certain to come up. They are almost certain to ask you this, and it's going to be really important that you give them a specific answer. Your goal might be to retire in 3 years. Excuse me. But I would advise you to work with us about how to answer that question so that it's honest, so you're not, lying, but you're going to answer it in a way that isn't going to take you out of consideration, okay? Because a lot of times people answer that question about what they want, and they're not thinking about what the employer is hoping to hear, okay? All right, now before we get to the questions, I want to talk a little bit about mistakes commonly made. Now, by the way, these mistakes commonly made are coming directly from the employers. This is what they recommend, that stumbling blocks that experienced workers frequently have a problem with. Okay. Number one, being seen as overqualified. I'm sure I didn't need to tell you that. I'm sure you run into that. Number two, losing momentum, starting the job hunt, being all excited about it, all organized, and you're doing all this stuff, and then just, ugh. Number three, letting your narrative be negative. And again, this gets a little bit into why did you leave your last job and all of that kind of stuff. And then finally, not updating your skills. So we're going to get into each one of these. Being seen as overqualified. Okay. The most common reason candidates are perceived to be overqualified is they have listed too many accomplishments on their resume, or they've listed accomplishments and skills that are unrelated to the job that is open. This is number one. This has actually been proven. This has actually been proven. For example, a former restaurant manager who genuinely wants to obtain a position as a cook. They've done the manager thing. They don't want to do it anymore. They might be sending the wrong message if the resume includes accomplishments like reducing operating costs. Now, that is a fantastic accomplishment. They're probably very right to be very proud of it, but it might set a little bit of a question in the hiring manager's mind as, ooh, is this person going to be tempted to offer improvement suggestions to their boss? Are they going to be constantly looking at what we're doing and judging and that kind of thing? So a better bet would be for them to focus on the skills that are listed on the job description and not add other accomplishments that were achieved at a higher level. By the way, the skills-based resume or the functional resume would probably be the best for scenarios like this. Now, if you're not familiar with the skills-based resume versus the chronological, again, as I said before, reach out to us and we can give you templates. We can talk you through that, okay? It's also smart to think about including unrelated accomplishments as well. So let's say, I don't know, you created some kind of a philanthropy project in your neighborhood and it went really, really well and it got media attention and people are really excited about it. Now, again, this is a genuine accomplishment, something to be genuinely proud of, but if you're going for a job where you pretty much sit at a desk all day long and you work on a laptop, could you be inadvertently sending the message, wow, this person's going to get really bored in this job. Sounds like they're really creative and they want to create programs, and that's really not the job that this is. So be thinking carefully about how your accomplishments and entries are going to be perceived, not only positively, but how could they possibly be seen as a negative? Okay, let's move to the interview. And again, this idea of being seen as overqualified. Now, it's important to remember that millennials and Generation Z are probably going to be the folks who are going to be interviewing you. Now, these people are highly collaborative. They're very, very team oriented. So if you've been the boss for many years, it can be really easy to slip into boss mode and speak like you did when you were in charge. Now, this can come across as threatening or off-putting. You also may be like me, you just speak with natural confidence. You're not necessarily feeling confident. This is just the way you've learned to talk. Again, this can sometimes be misunderstood as somebody who doesn't want to listen, somebody who doesn't want to consider other people's points of view or be part of a team. It can be a really tricky line to walk. So again, mock interviewing is a great way to give yourself a chance to practice listening techniques, looking for opportunities of communicating that you really look forward for a chance to fit in with their established team. Okay? Now I feel like I'm going again a million miles an hour, but I've just got a couple of pages and then we're going to open it up for questions. Losing momentum. One of the biggest challenges people report about looking for work as an older worker is just running out of steam. And a lot of seekers say that they start out with loads of enthusiasm and organization and goals, and then family commitments pop up, or frustration gets the better of them, or they just plain lose their drive. Now, if you're determined to obtain employment, make goals for yourself now, but also seek out a support network that will help you stick to your plan. I always recommend thinking of it as a marathon rather than a sprint. Just like a marathon runner needs hydration and fuel all the way through the race, you will too. Now, you may snag a position shortly after starting your search. That's great, but don't beat yourself up if it doesn't happen like that. Things are challenging these days. You need endurance. Okay? All right. A biggie, letting your narrative be negative. A common mistake is unintentionally coming across negative. Now, as I mentioned earlier, you may have some residual bitterness regarding a former employer. Seek assistance in finding truthful, neutral language to use when talking about them. If an employer gets the impression that they're interviewing a really judgmental person who's kind of sitting there with a lot of emotional baggage, it's going to be natural for them to choose another candidate who's really excited and positive and enthusiastic about this new opportunity. Now, by the way, this is not to say you have to create fake excitement, okay? They're going to spot that immediately. But I always say leave the baggage at the door and bring in your skills and accomplishments and enthusiasm, okay? Be careful about word choice. Words fired and laid off are not interchangeable. Okay. Laid off means you lost your job because your organization closed or restructured or downsized, moved. There was no longer a need for your particular position. A lot of people, by the way, were laid off because of COVID. There is nothing to be ashamed of in that. The word fired is very emotional. It's very negative. If you want, I would suggest a more neutral term. If you want the official term, involuntary separation, just kind of cuts down on the emotion a little bit. I would really suggest, if that was the situation, for you to get beyond the understandable discomfort and seriously work with our team to talk about those times. You want to make sure that you don't represent yourself as laid off, because the chances are we'll do a background check and they can find that out immediately, and then it's going to be what the heck. But seriously, what I would suggest is it happens more often than you would think. And we are here, and this is what we do, and we can help you tell the story truthfully, but at the same time kind of sideswipe all of the unnecessary negativity. Okay, not updating your skills. So if you've been employed with the same organization for 30 years, you have a solid set of skills that your particular organization needed you to have. However, when you go out exploring other organizations, you may find that other skills might be needed. Sometimes it's just not enough to be willing to learn. Honestly, think about it. A hiring manager has two candidates. One candidate says, well, I may not have personal experience with this particular software, but I'm certainly willing to learn. But the other candidate says, well, yes, I've used this software for the past 3 years, and in my previous position, here are my specific accomplishments using it. So the importance of that software may decide which one of you gets the job. So you might be interested in going back to work you did many years ago. Depending on the nature of the work, even a degree may not entirely be what you need to be qualified. For example, I'll use myself as an example. I got a teaching degree and a teaching license in the 80s. The fact of the matter is, particularly over the past year, teaching has been turned upside down and inside out. And so somebody going into a teaching job now, after being aware from it, is going to have to learn how to create online dynamic and effective content. Okay, so it's a brand new world. So there are going to be times when you will need to update your skills. And this is an old slide, and I'm really sorry about this. I should really get this updated. But check out our Dislocated Worker program. It's an opportunity to get short-term training and support going into something else. There are programs like Coursera. There used to be a thing that we had going for a while there where a lot of the classes were free. They're not doing that currently now, but you might want to check it out anyway. It's a fantastic online program that where the content is being created by world-class organizations and universities. Okay. Oh, I feel like I've been talking. Now, the rest of this time, I'm going to open it up, and I want you guys to drive what we talk about for the rest of the time. I want questions. I want to see my pal Art up on the screen. Let's start digging into some of this stuff. Hi, Art.
Yes, so I hope my audio is a little bit better. If not, I'll take the video off if I need to. But we've got a ton of questions. Thank you. I'll get to as many as we can. And so I'm just going to rapid fire, give the questions, and Robin can comment on them. So when you're putting together an online profile, how does chronological formats / profiles work within LinkedIn? I mean, how do you work that within LinkedIn?
Absolutely. Now, there are going to be times when, whether it be LinkedIn or whether it be an application that a job wants you to fill out, you're going to have to kind of do what they want you to do. And you're right, LinkedIn can't, and that's one of the things that sometimes people get frustrated with, is that you can't really customize a lot of stuff. So what I would say is LinkedIn, try to replicate as much as you can with what you're doing on your resume. So it's not like people are going to your LinkedIn and thinking, this is a totally different person. But remember, your resume still remains your best marketing tool. But yes, I am a big believer in LinkedIn. I'm a big believer in you having a presence, because too many people are looking for it. As for the applications, again, follow their lead. If they ask you to do it chronologically, you're going to have to do it chronologically. But usually there are spaces, even within LinkedIn, where you can put a summary statement. This is what I had to do years ago when I changed jobs, and I had been in fundraising for years and years. I wanted to go back to teaching, and so I created a summary statement at the very, very top that explained that even though I've been doing this, I want to go back to this, and hopefully they read this on the top.
Okay, combining a couple questions, is it absolutely necessary to have some sort of online portfolio? Do you have to have a LinkedIn or something similar?
Do you absolutely have to? No, but honestly, I feel like there's enough value in LinkedIn. My personal feeling about it is, why shouldn't you? It's a great way also to network with people, find out who else is in the area you want to be in. And sometimes there are opportunities for you to introduce yourself to those people and to get some valuable networking information. So I mean, is there absolutely have to, somebody's going to hold a gun to your head if you don't? No, you don't. But I would say it is a hugely valuable tool. If you're a little intimidated about it, we still have LinkedIn class, right, Art?
Yes.
Yeah, so we do have a LinkedIn class. We will guide you through it. And if it's just that you're not sure and you're a little anxious about it, please don't let that be the thing that stops you.
Okay, how about reaching out to former employers for a reference letter? Can that be important? Is that valuable?
It certainly is. Certainly with references, they always say the gold standard is a former supervisor. If you can get a supervisor's recommendation or letter of reference, that's great. It kind of depends upon if they are still working with your former company and if they are allowed to do so. A lot of companies across the board simply just ask their people, do not give letters of reference while you are employed with us. So don't take it personally. It's a company process. But if they are allowed to, yes, that actually somebody who had some kind of supervisory capacity over you is kind of considered the most weighty reference you can get. And yes, absolutely reach out to them.
Okay. Combining a couple of questions, how do you filter your job search for part-time or remote work? How could you do that?
It depends. A lot of times the job boards you can do that automatically. I've been reminding people about the Minnesota Council for Nonprofits. I got a soft spot in my heart for nonprofit work, and so I frequently will remind people that it's there when they've been working for a lot of, or looking rather, for a lot of for-profit stuff. I keep thinking, don't forget the nonprofits. And the reason I'm even remembering this is that they've got a filter right away where they ask you right away, full-time or part-time. So yeah, I would say most of the job boards online that you will find will have that filter right away. Part-time, full-time, in the Twin Cities area, outstate, wherever you can filter.
I love this question because I've seen it work. I've seen it happen multiple times. When an experienced worker applies for an entry-level position and that's what they want, but they're immediately pushed towards higher roles. How do you prevent that without coming across as someone who is not interested in working hard? Yeah, and if you don't understand the question, ask me for clarity.
I think I do, Art, and let me see if let me shoot for to try to answer it, and then definitely jump in with your experience as well, because that is always valuable. Um, so yeah, I definitely get what you mean. There are times in your life where you don't want to deal with the hassle of a higher job. You just want to focus on the job itself. And I'm thinking back of the example that I had of the cook who used to manage a restaurant. This was actually a person I worked with. And he said, I just felt like I got so far away from my passion, which is working with the food, that I couldn't focus on anything else. And so we were talking about really, really focusing on what they needed this person to do and how they wanted to bring excellence to that particular position. And if you just approach it from a positive, rather than saying, no, I don't want to do this, because that's negative language. But, oh, I'm so excited about the idea of maybe creating new dishes, or working together with the team in the kitchen and really establishing a great team effort there. Concentrate on what you can bring to the role at hand. Does that make sense? Is that kind of what you were thinking,
Yes.
Art, or feel free to jump in?
Well, also, if we'll be sending everyone kind of how to avoid overqualification issues. A lot of the times we put it on ourselves. We talk about too much. Apply and talk about the skills that you can bring to this job. And the more you bring out about your previous higher level jobs, the more likely they are going to try to put you into those positions.
Hmm.
So sometimes we do it to ourselves.
Yep.
Um, A couple of questions about cover letters and emails after the interview. Are they still a thing?
Cover letters apparently are hanging in there after I thought they were a thing of the past and then found out with a lot of industries, no, they're still a thing. I love cover letters. If anybody wants any tips on writing cover letters, I've always been excited about writing cover letters. So what I like about cover letters is that they can be very similar to your summary statement and can be very similar to your elevator speech. Remember, that's kind of a 30-second encapsulation of who you are and what you want to do and what you're going to do really, really well. So I always included a cover letter just because I liked writing them and I felt that they were effective. So yeah. Emails, and I'm assuming that you're talking about thank you. Yeah, I think personally, here's the deal. With thank you letters, I think emails are maybe getting a little more popular just because more people are working from home. And if you do an interview teleconferenced, it's very possible that the person who interviewed you is actually working from home, and they're certainly not going to give you their address to send a thank you. So I think emails do tend to be the way that people do. And I absolutely will send a follow-up thank you email after that interview because, among other things, it will give me the opportunity of reminding them what they liked about me the best. And you can always tell. You can always tell that section of the interview where they really, really were engaged with you and they were really excited about what you were saying. And that's the thing that I like to remind them of as I thank them for the opportunity.
And also, it gives you an opportunity to show another skill set that you know how to put words together in narrative form, which is a lost art at this point. Questions about what are some free sites for upskilling, for refreshing your skills? I'm going to put one into the chat box that deals with computer skills, but there are all sorts of different ones. Robin, can you think of some free sites that speak to refreshing skills?
Did you do gcflearnfree.org? Did you throw
That's
that
one I'm
one
going to
in?
put in.
I love that one. That is so cool. If you guys want some really, really good, free, really, really intuitive refresher skills for computers, go for that. The other thing that I want to throw in is maybe you're working with maybe specific software that is going to be specific to the industry you're in. First of all, number one, I'm going to go back to the beauty of informational interviewing and talking and networking with the people who are doing the work that you are going to be doing. Find out what the software is that they use. Find out how important it is. From there, you may be able to find a class Googling it online. What I did when I wanted to go back into teaching and I was seeing all of this e-learning software and this instructional design software, I found that all of those programs had 30-day free trials. And I know Art can appreciate this because he and I are very similar in this way. I would download that software and I would use it and teach myself how to use it and look at all the videos and create as much as I could. And then on day 29, I would get rid of it so I didn't have to pay for it. So there are ways that you can do it. But yeah, we will continue to look and find the sites for reskilling and upskilling and all of that good stuff. Yep.
Yeah, and another thing to think about is, if you can familiarize yourself with similar software. So maybe it's not that you do video editing through a certain program, but you've done some free program. There's always free programs out there that are very similar, and then you have a general knowledge of how to do it, and then you just have to adapt that knowledge to their specific program.
Absolutely.
Because there are situations in which you'll never have access to that specific program, but it's much better to say, I have knowledge of a similar program than I've never attempted to look into it.
And don't you think too, Art, that there's something to be said for the initiative that you show? Reach out to see if you can volunteer to do some stuff too. I was this far away from presenting myself to Career Force years ago and say, hey, could I do a couple of workshops as a volunteer to get some experience under my belt? And I didn't need to because I got a job before that happened, but I was actually looking for volunteer experiences or just ways that I could strengthen my skills.
So a couple questions about involuntary separations, or the more harsh way of being let go.
Yep.
How do you handle that and on an application and then on an interview?
Yep. So here's the thing. Number one, a lot of the biggest fight is going to be with yourself and getting yourself beyond. I think the emotions that we bring up with that are the biggest hurdle. The most wonderful thing that I remember hearing an HR friend of mine say, I don't even remember what conversation we were having, but she said, you'd be shocked to know how many people actually have to experience this. My colleague here and I found a little bit. We used to do an advanced interviewing class back pre-COVID when we did it in the classroom. And somebody confessed at the end of class. She said, I was terrified of coming here because I'd been fired and I just was so filled with shame. But by opening up that door, 4 other people raised their hands and went, me too. And they just looked at each other in shock and appreciation with the fact that all of a sudden it didn't feel that horrible. So number one, a lot of it is just getting over the understandable emotions involved. Number two, you don't want to get into the weeds. Our colleague Marnie is really good at this. She said, you know, most of the time you give way more information than you need to. So the big thing you're going to want to realize is you don't need to get into the weeds and you don't want to get into a long involved story of what happened. And you surely do not want to get into the emotional language associated with it. What I suggest people do is the first thing, write out your response. Get a piece of paper, write out, why did you leave your last job? And actually craft a response. And then contact us and say, please read this and let's talk about it. Okay? I think by actually that act of writing it out, it's amazing how much you see. Ooh, I didn't need to throw that in there. Ooh, that sounds a little bit harsh. Ooh, that's kind of vague. Maybe I should give them more information. So that is in a nutshell. I would say try to craft some kind of a response first, reach out to us, and then let us talk.
Yes, definitely. I concur. And it's a great opportunity to take one of these one-on-one appointments from a career force location because everyone's situation is different. And that deals with a lot of the questions we're seeing here. They're very specific. The key is overall, the employer wants to know why is it going to be an issue going forward? And if you can give them a reason that, hey, this happened, but here's why it's not an issue going forward, whether that's long-term unemployment, whether that's caring for a sick loved one, whether that's a termination, that's the key there is crafting a response that explains the situation, gets past it, and says, I'm ready to go. All right, let's take a look. We got a whole bunch to get to, and we'll get to as many as we can. As far as we got a couple questions about how can employers, and someone listed a Minnesota employer in specific, how can an employer send you a follow-up email or a questionnaire that says, are you under 40 years old? Why can they do that? How can they do that as part of the application process?
Yep, absolutely. So there are times actually when asking about age is actually legal and very appropriate. I think the more obvious example of that would be if you're a bar and you want to know if somebody is, you know, of age. But there are going to be times. I think the best thing to remember is to, if you're unsure why they're asking the question, I mean, my guess is that sometimes it's going to be obvious why. But if it's not, for whatever reason, I would say, go ahead and feel free to ask them and just say, you know, could you explain to me further, please, why my age is going to be of bearing in this job? Because don't assume that simply because they bring up age at all, that they are immediately going to be discriminating. Sometimes there are legitimate reasons. Sometimes there are legitimate concerns. Do you have any other things you want to add to that, Art?
Yeah, in many cases, they're required to do it by law, and it's to our advantage. The reason they ask is to make sure that they're in compliance with equal opportunity hiring practices. If they find out that they are only getting applicants that are over 40 or under 40, then they're not reaching out to the broad spectrum of potential employees. So those are separated in most cases from the actual application. They're just kind of a survey to make sure that they're doing things the way they are legally required to. I do understand that the initial take is, wait a second, they just asked me how old I am. Don't think of that as attached to your application consideration. It's something else. Now, in a very small employer, they may ask you your age. And in that case, do exactly as Robin is stating. Just don't put any emotion into it. Don't say, I don't think you can ask me that, because that puts them on the defensive. It's a hard question to ask, but saying, why would you, what's the purpose of this? I'm just trying to understand why you're asking this, might be a better tactic.
Yep.
How do you, we had a couple questions about this. How do you talk about caring for someone, taking time off to care for someone? Do you include that in your resume, or do you have that as a gap in employment?
With regards to the resume, again, I would say take a look and see if that gap is going to be glaring, if it's going to start creating more questions, in which case you might want to consider doing a skills-based resume and actually setting up your resume according to the skills sections as opposed to the chronological. So number one, Marty always talks about your resume as your marketing document. Okay? So you want to make sure that your marketing document is telling the best story about you and how your skills match this job. So the first thing that you want to do is you want your resume to be a selling tool for you. And that consequently is going to be a document that's going to talk about your skills and your accomplishments and what you do really well and why you match this job. Applications tend to be where you have to deal with gaps in employment and things like that. Again, we said this several times, but it bears repeating. You don't need to get into the weeds of who this person was and specifically why you needed to care for them and why nobody else could and all of that. You want to make sure that just say there was a medical emergency or a medical need, that I needed to be primary caregiver for a period of time. And then, as Art says, the important thing is not so much what you did back then, but is this going to be an issue going forward? And if you can explain to them that the situation has been resolved, the situation is taken care of, or what have you, and that moving forward, this is not going to be an issue as I start with your company.
What about short-term positions that didn't work out? Maybe you have long-term work history, and then you did something for 3 months, and it just wasn't a good fit, and for whatever reason, do you need to include that on either the application or the resume?
Again, it depends on how you feel that is going to market you. If it was a short-term position that still required a lot of the same transferable skills, the skills that you can plug into a number of jobs, that might be a great one to add. And I have done that before. I've done a short-term gig and I've said, man, that was a great opportunity. I got a chance to do this and I got a chance to learn this. And what I talked about was the positives of that short term. Okay. So I may say, well, it wasn't necessarily something that I wanted to do in the long term, but boy, I had a great time and this is what I learned and this is what I accomplished. If it is way off, if it's going to create more questions than answers, if it's this really kind of blip, there's a couple of ways you can handle that. Yeah, you can leave it off, but then there's going to be a gap. Or, Art and I talk a lot about how you can bring up something that might be perceived as negative, but you do it in kind of a fun way so that it doesn't seem at all, and just say, well, that was kind of a blip, I had an opportunity, it presented itself, it seemed like something I wanted to give it a try to. It isn't something I want to do full time, but it was a good try. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, it's situational, certainly. Speaking, I'm gonna try to put a whole bunch of questions together because we only got a couple minutes. If you are close to retirement and you're worried about someone, is it worth training this person in? Can you speak a little bit about staffing agencies and the place they hold in people looking for work at an older age, the benefit?
Oh, the benefits? Yeah, actually, I very briefly worked for Robert Half, and I was in instructional design, so everybody on our team actually was there on a contract basis. Boy, I tell you, I had a lot of people who loved it, absolutely loved it. It was going to be a short gig. They knew when it was going to be over, and they could, plan their year accordingly. And they absolutely adored it. So if it's short-term gigs, generally speaking, I mean, again, it depends upon the person. The advantage is that you tend to get paid a little more. You're not necessarily going to get insurance, but if you can get insurance through something else, you get paid a little bit more. It's a very focused work. At least my experience was that it was very focused work. We knew what we were there to do. Knew what we were there to accomplish. And then it got done after about 6 months. A lot of people will choose to do this, and this is their career. And this is what they do all the time. So yes, I would definitely think that contract positions, temporary positions, might be a very, very, very positive thing. Depending again where you are, if the insurance package and things like that are still really important to you, if possibly being there longer term than 6 months or 9 months or whatever is important to you, it may not work for you, but it's definitely something to look into.
It also affords you the opportunity of an extended, I think of it as an interview. You know, it can be your gateway to getting to an employer. If you're looking more long-term with your career and have had trouble getting into an employer, sometimes a staffing agency provides that introduction that works out best for both, because the employer isn't fully connected to you. They can terminate employment, you know, very easily because it's through a staffing agency. But if you are someone who's doing a great job for them, I know a lot of people who started their career at a temp agency and then eventually were hired on full time with that company. So it has its advantages and distractions, of course.
Not to mention the fact that working through a staffing agency, they're very good at marketing you. I learned so much about what I was not saying to market myself just by working with the people who were paid to talk me up. So it can really give you a leg up if you're not used to tooting your own horn, to have somebody do it for you. It's 11 o'clock. There we are. Okay,
Wow.
guys, this has been fantastic, and I apologize that we probably didn't get through every single question. But as I said at the beginning, think of this webinar as the first step. What I would really suggest you do now is go on to careerforcemn.com and click on the locations section and find the nearest career force near you. Give them a call. Find out what they're doing. Find out if they've got face-to-face or whether you would prefer to have an over the phone or over teleconference meeting with them. Have some specific questions. Have those practice answers to some of those questions and continue the relationship to there. All righty. Thank you, everybody.
So just real quick.
Oh, go ahead, Art.
Oh, just real quick, a lot of questions about this. As many of the links as we put into the chat, we'll include in the follow-up tomorrow. That was a question. Thank you, Robin. Thank you, everybody. I'll let Robin wrap it up and have a great day, everybody.
Have a fantastic day, everybody. Reach out to us when you need us. We're here. Bye-bye.